At my grandfather's will reading, everyone in my family became rich before lunch. My father got 5 million. My mother got 3. My brother Caleb got 2 and laughed like the room belonged to him. Then the lawyer slid one cream envelope toward me. Inside was a single $50 bill. No letter, no apology, just $50. My dad smiled. I said nothing, because Arthur Whitaker never made careless moves. I stared at that bill until the light caught a tiny mark near the numbers. 1 hour later, a bank manager saw it, locked his door, and whispered, "Who sent you from the grave?" I grew up in a house where silence was rewarded as long as it was mine. The Whitaker family looked perfect from the outside: big front windows, white columns, a Thanksgiving table long enough to seat people who barely knew how to love each other. Every November, my mother Vivian would set out polished silverware, crystal glasses, and a pumpkin pie from a bakery she pretended was homemade. My father Malcolm would sit at the head of the table, carving turkey like he was opening a board meeting. And Caleb, my older brother, always sat to his right. That was his place. No one ever said it out loud, but everyone knew. Caleb was the son with the future, the bold one, the charming one, the one my father introduced first at charity dinners and country club brunches. "This is Caleb," he would say, his hand landing proudly on my brother's shoulder. "He's got real vision." Then he would turn to me, and "This is Ginger." That was usually it. Sometimes he added, "She's sweet." Sometimes, "She keeps to herself." Once, at a Christmas dinner, he laughed and said, "Ginger never asks for much, makes life easy." Everyone smiled. I smiled too, because I had learned early that if I reacted, I became the problem. If I looked hurt, I was sensitive. If I spoke up, I was jealous. If I walked away, I was dramatic. So I stayed pleasant, useful, quiet. Arthur Whitaker was the only one who saw the difference. To everyone else, my grandfather was a billionaire with his name on buildings and lawyers who answered after one ring. To me, he was the old man who drank black coffee from the same chipped mug every morning, kept handwritten notes in the margins of newspapers, and hated loud rooms. He never praised Caleb just because Caleb filled the air. He watched when Arthur got sick. The house changed. It smelled like antiseptic wipes, stale flowers, and coffee gone cold. My father visited in pressed suits, checking his watch after 10 minutes. My mother brought lilies and placed them where Arthur could see them, then left before they wilted. Caleb came once, stood near the bedroom door, and said, "You'll bounce back, Grandpa." Arthur looked at him for a long second, then Caleb left. I stayed. I read the newspaper when Arthur's eyes got tired. I folded the blanket over his knees. I made sure the nurse wrote down which pills made him dizzy. Some nights, the only sound in the room was the vent humming above us and Arthur's breathing, thin and stubborn. One evening, he caught my wrist before I could leave. "Ginger," he said, his voice rough. "People like your father look at a room and see who is useful." I swallowed. "And what do you see?" His thumb tapped my wrist once. "Who stays when there's nothing to gain?" I laughed softly because it hurt too much not to. He didn't laugh. "If I ever leave you something small," he whispered, "look at it longer than they do." 2 weeks later, he was gone, and when the letter came from the lawyer, I held it against my chest like a fool, hoping the man who saw me had remembered me. The lawyer's office sat downtown, high above the street, where the windows were sealed shut and everything smelled like leather, paper, and money. I arrived 10 minutes early. That was another habit I had learned from my family. If I was early, no one could accuse me of being careless. If I sat quietly, no one could accuse me of wanting attention. So I chose the chair farthest from the head of the table. My father noticed. He always did. Malcolm walked in wearing a navy suit and the calm expression of a man who believed every room should rearrange itself around him. My mother came beside him, pearls at her throat, perfume sweet enough to cover any discomfort. Caleb came last, sunglasses still hanging from his collar. Like this was a lunch reservation he had been forced to attend. No one hugged me. No one even said my name. The lawyer, Nora Ellis, opened a thick folder in front of her. She had gray blonde hair, careful hands, and the kind of voice people use when they know every word might start a fight. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Arthur Whitaker," she said. My fingers tightened around the strap of my purse. I told myself not to hope. Hope was dangerous in my family. Hope made you look foolish when nobody chose you. Nora started with my father, to Malcolm Whitaker. I leave the sum of approximately $5 million. My father lowered his eyes like he was humbled, but I saw his mouth soften at the corners. Not joy, satisfaction, like the number had arrived exactly where it belonged. To Vivian Whitaker, approximately $3 million. My mother pressed a tissue beneath one eye. It came away dry. To Caleb Whitaker, approximately $2 million. Caleb leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. Then he looked across the table at me, one eyebrow raised, almost playful, like we were back at the Thanksgiving table and he had just been served first again. Nora turned a page. Her hand paused. That tiny pause made the room feel colder. "And to Ginger Whitaker," she said. I held my breath. Nora reached for a small cream envelope. It was thinner than the others, too thin. She opened it, removed a single bill, and laid it on the table as if it were evidence. The sum of $50. For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard her. 50, not 50,000, not a trust summary, not a keepsake with a note attached. One bill. The silence that followed was so sharp I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Then Caleb laughed. Not loud, not even fully, just a small, ugly sound through his nose. "Well," he said, "that says a lot." My father smiled. That hurt more than the laugh, because Caleb was cruel when he wanted attention. My father was cruel when he thought he was right. Vivian stared at her lap. I waited for someone to say it was wrong, that there had to be another page, that Arthur would never do that to the person who had sat beside him while everyone else checked their watches. Nobody spoke. Nora slid the bill toward me. "I'm sorry," she said softly, almost too softly for anyone else to hear. I picked it up. The paper felt dry and ordinary between my fingers. I wanted to cry, but the room was too full of people waiting to enjoy it, so I folded the bill once and stood. "Excuse me," I said. My voice did not shake. That surprised me most. Behind me, Caleb muttered something, and a few chairs shifted. My father did not call after me. My mother did not follow. I made it to the parking garage before my knees gave out. I sat in my car with the door locked and the engine off, the city rumbling somewhere above me. My hands were cold. My face was hot. That $50 bill lay on my lap like a final insult. Then the overhead light flickered. For 1 second. It caught the corner of the bill just right, and I saw it. A tiny mark near the numbers. So small. So deliberate. I almost stopped breathing. Because Arthur had told me exactly what to do with small things. I almost threw the bill away. That is the part I hate admitting. For 1 ugly second, I wanted to roll down the window, let the cold air rush in, and watch that $50 disappear into the dark parking garage like every other little thing my family had made me swallow. But Arthur's voice came back to me. "If I ever leave you something small, look at it longer than they do." So I looked. The mark was not a stain. It was not a crease or a printing flaw. It sat beside the serial numbers like a tiny scratch made by someone with steady hands and too much patience. Arthur's kind of patience. I drove across the city without calling anyone. The late afternoon had turned gray, the kind of gray that makes office towers look like they are keeping secrets. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The bank was old, narrow, and quiet. Not flashy, not one of those glass and steel places with screens on every wall. This one still had marble floors, brass rails, and a security guard who nodded like he had been doing it for 30 years. "I need to speak with the branch manager," I told the receptionist. She gave me a polite smile. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said. "But it's about Arthur Whitaker." The smile faded. 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from Mr. Bennett. He was in his 60s, maybe older, with silver hair, careful eyes, and a voice so controlled it made me sit straighter. "What can I do for you?" "Ms. Whitaker." I placed the $50 bill on his desk. "This was left to me in my grandfather's will," I said. "I think he marked it." "At first." Mr. Bennett looked at me the way professionals look at grieving relatives, gently, patiently. Like I might be confused and he did not want to embarrass me. Then he looked down, his face changed. Not a lot, just enough. His eyes stopped moving. His hand hovered above the bill. The room seemed to shrink around the quiet. At the bank. I would remember later. The manager looked at me and froze. Then he stood, walked to the door, and locked it. My mouth went dry. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "From the will reading. No replacement, no check, this exact bill, yes." He sat back down slowly and pulled a small folder from his drawer. Inside were copies of signatures, dates, and instructions written in language I barely understood, except for one thing. My name, Ginger Whitaker. Mr. Bennett turned the bill under his desk lamp. "Your grandfather created a private verification process. He said only one person would bring this in." "What does it verify?" I whispered. He looked at me differently then, not with pity, with respect. "A living trust," he said. "Established before his death. Fully legal. Outside the public will." My heartbeat filled my ears. How much he paused, as if even the number needed permission to enter the room. A little over $30 million. I stared at him. The words did not feel real. 30 million was a headline number. A lottery number. Not a number that belonged in the same room as my trembling hands and swollen eyes. Mr. Bennett opened a secure cabinet and removed a second envelope. Cream paper. My name written across the front in Arthur's narrow handwriting. Inside was one letter. My Ginger. If you are reading this. Then you looked longer than they did. That means I was right. The money I gave you today was never meant to measure your worth. It was meant to measure theirs. I needed you to see who smiled when you were diminished, who laughed when you were humiliated, and who stayed silent because your pain did not cost them anything. You stayed when there was nothing to gain. That is why I trusted you with everything they would have wasted. I covered my mouth, but the sound still came out. Arthur had not forgotten me. He had watched all of them. Mr. Bennett waited while I cried. Then he slid another set of papers across the desk. "There are protections in place," he said, "but you need counsel before anyone pressures you." I wiped my face. For the first time all day, my hands stopped shaking. "Then help me make the call," I said, because when my family came back for what they thought was theirs, they were not going to find the same quiet woman they had laughed out of that office. They gave me 3 days. 3 days of silence from people who had laughed while I held $50 in my hand. Then the calls started. First my mother, then my father, then Caleb, twice, back to back. I let every one of them go to voicemail, not because I was scared, because my attorney had told me something simple. Do not negotiate with people who think guilt is a contract by Friday night. Rain was tapping against my windows, soft and steady. I had just made tea when someone knocked, not politely, hard. I looked through the peephole and saw all 3 of them standing in the hallway. Malcolm in his dark coat, Vivian clutching her purse with both hands, Caleb leaning against the wall like he was already bored. I opened the door but did not step aside. My father looked past me into the apartment. "We need to talk." About what Caleb laughed. "Don't do that." "Ginger." My mother's face folded into concern so quickly it almost looked practiced. "Honey, please, let us come in." I should have said no. Instead, I stepped back because some old part of me still recognized their voices as family. They entered like they owned the air. My father stood in the middle of my living room, eyes scanning the small couch, the bookshelves, the framed photo of Arthur on the side table. "Still living modestly," he said. "Interesting." Caleb smirked. "Guess 30 million doesn't buy taste." There it was, not a question, an accusation. I set my mug down carefully. So, my mother inhaled sharply, like I had confessed to something shameful. My father's jaw tightened. We know enough. We know your grandfather moved assets into a trust before he died. We know that ridiculous $50 bill was not just sentimental. Sentimental, I repeated. Caleb pushed off the wall. You played us. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I sat in that room and said nothing while you laughed at me. He rolled his eyes. Oh, come on, it was awkward. No, I said. It was honest. The room went quiet. My father took one step closer. That money came from this family. That money came from Arthur. And Arthur was not thinking clearly at the end. That was the first lie. Not the legal kind. The family kind. The kind people use when they want to erase a dead man's choice because they do not like who he chose. I opened the drawer beside the couch and took out the folder my attorney had prepared. Vivian stared at it like it was a weapon. In a way, it was. I laid the papers on the coffee table. The trust was created while Arthur was alive. Evaluated, witnessed, and protected. I am the sole beneficiary. My father did not touch the folder. Caleb did. He flipped one page, then another, his smirk thinning. What is this clause, he asked? My father grabbed the paper from him. I watched the color leave his face one shade at a time. It means, I said, if anyone tries to challenge the will or interfere with the trust, their inheritance can be frozen and potentially forfeited, Vivian whispered. Ginger, you wouldn't do that. I looked at my mother then, the woman who had watched me take $50 in front of everyone and chosen her lap over my face. I'm not doing anything, I said. Arthur already did. My father's voice dropped. You think money makes you powerful? No, I said, but boundaries do. Caleb's mouth twisted. So that's it. You get everything, and we're supposed to just accept it. You accepted it when you thought I got nothing. That landed. For the first time in my life, Caleb had no joke ready. My mother began to cry, quietly at first. This family is all we have. No, I said. This family is what you used whenever you wanted me to feel guilty. My father folded the papers with slow, controlled movements. You will regret this. Maybe once, that would have broken me. That night. It only made me tired. I walked to the door and opened it. Rain hummed in the hallway behind them, then let me regret it in peace. One by one. They left, Caleb first, angry and pale. Vivian next, still crying. My father last, his eyes cold enough to turn the room winter. When I shut the door, the apartment went silent, but for the first time, silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like ownership. My father never filed anything, not because he forgave me, because he had read the clause. That was the strange part about people like Malcolm. They could call you selfish. They could call you ungrateful. They could tell the whole family you had changed. But the second the risk touched their own money, they suddenly understood boundaries perfectly. Caleb blocked me first. Then cousins stopped inviting me to dinners I had never enjoyed anyway. My mother sent one message that said, I hope someday you remember who raised you. I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it, not out of anger, out of peace. Over the next few months, I worked with my attorney and Mr. Bennett to secure everything Arthur had left. The trust stayed protected, the investments stayed quiet, the gold, the contracts, the bills, the records. All of it went where it belonged. Under my control and away from people who only discovered family values when money was nearby. I did not buy a mansion. I did not post photos online. I did not throw some glittering party to prove I had won. I kept my apartment for a while. I kept my old coffee maker. I kept Arthur's chipped mug on the kitchen shelf, even though the handle was cracked and my mother would have called it embarrassing. And I framed the $50 bill, not in some huge dramatic display, just a small frame on my desk, beside Arthur's letter. At first, I thought it would remind me of the worst day of my life. It didn't. It reminded me of the day I finally saw everyone clearly, years later. When my daughter Maya was born, I understood Arthur's gift in a different way. She had his serious eyes and my stubborn little frown. On rainy mornings, she would sit at the kitchen table drawing flowers on scrap paper while I made coffee, and the whole house would smell warm and ordinary. No crystal glasses, no perfect Thanksgiving table, no one measuring love by inheritance. Just peace. I used part of the trust's earnings to help women who needed legal and financial guidance, especially the ones trapped in families that called control love, because Arthur had not left me $30 million so I could become untouchable. He left it so I would never again have to beg to be seen. Love does not laugh when you are humiliated. Family does not show up only when there is money to claim. And sometimes, the smallest thing they hand you, the thing meant to prove you were nothing, becomes the proof that saves your life. If you have ever had to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to protect you, you are not alone. Share your story in the comments and subscribe, because the next story might sound painfully familiar.